The rain fell softly over the town of Havenbrook, tapping against windows and puddling in the cracks of the old brick sidewalks. It was a Tuesday evening in early autumn, the kind of night most people would rather spend at home with a warm drink and a book. But inside the town hall the lights were bright, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and photocopy paper. The monthly council meeting was about to begin. The council chamber wasn't large, just a long room with wooden benches, a raised dais for the officials, and a faded town seal painted above the door. About 40 people had shown up, which was more than usual. Some were regulars. Mrs. Delgado, who always wore a bright red scarf and took careful notes. Mr. Finch, retired and never missing a meeting since his wife passed. And young Leo, the high school student who filmed everything for the school newspaper. Others were just curious neighbors drawn by rumors of a new recycling plan that might mean more bins but fewer pickup days. At the front of the room, Mayor Eleanor Cho adjusted her glasses and smoothed the front of her navy blue blazer. She'd been mayor for 6 years, elected after promising common sense and kindness. She wasn't flashy, but people trusted her. She spoke clearly, listened carefully, and never raised her voice, even when Mr. Henderson from Oak Street yelled about his mailbox again. Tonight she looked tired. Her eyes had dark circles and her smile was a little tight. Behind her, the other council members shuffled papers and whispered to each other. Councilwoman Patel checked her watch. Councilman Ruiz sipped from a travel mug. Everything felt routine, predictable, the kind of meeting that would end by 9 and everyone could go home before the rain got worse. Outside, the streetlights glowed through the mist. A few latecomers hurried up the steps, shaking water from their coats. One of them was Harold Briggs. Harold wasn't a regular at these meetings. In fact, he'd never been to one before. He lived on the edge of town in a small house he'd inherited from his parents. His mother, Agnes, had moved in with him 2 years ago after her stroke. She was 83 now, mostly bedridden and needed special medical supplies, wound dressings, catheters, things that couldn't go in the regular trash. The town had a rule. Medical waste had to be taken to the county facility 10 miles away. But Harold didn't have a car anymore, and the bus didn't run past his street. He'd written 3 letters asking for a hardship exemption so he could dispose of the waste with his regular trash. All 3 had been denied with the same polite, printed response. Per Municipal Code 7.4, exceptions cannot be granted without documented proof of transportation, hardship, and physician certification. He'd gotten the latest letter that afternoon. His hands shook as he folded it into his coat pocket. He didn't want to make a scene. He just wanted someone to listen. Now, as he pushed open the heavy door to the council chamber, all eyes turned to him. He was breathing hard, not from the walk, he lived only 8 blocks away, but from the weight of everything he'd carried for months. His shoes squeaked on the wet floor. Water dripped from the brim of his old cap. Mayor Cho noticed him right away. We have a visitor," she said gently. "Please take a seat. We're just about to begin." But Harold didn't sit. He stood near the back, clutching a crumpled manila envelope. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He waited as the mayor called the meeting to order, thanked everyone for coming, and introduced the first item, the new recycling initiative. It sounded harmless. Color-coded bins, clearer instructions, a small fee increase to cover costs. People nodded along. Mrs. Delgado scribbled something in her notebook. Then came the public. Comment period, the part of the meeting where residents could speak for up to 3 minutes. Harold raised his hand. "Sir, you'll need to sign in at the desk if you'd like to speak," said the clerk. "I didn't know," Harold said, his voice rough, "but I need to say something now." A few people shifted in their seats. Mayor Cho gave him a kind but firm look. "We follow procedure here, Mr. Briggs." Harold Briggs. "Well, Mr. Briggs, if you'd like to be heard tonight, please sign in quickly. We have a full agenda." Harold hesitated. He looked around the room, at the neat rows of people, their calm faces, their folded hands. They all seemed so normal, so in control. Meanwhile, he'd spent the morning cleaning up a spill his mother couldn't help. Then walked in the rain to the post office only to find another rejection letter waiting. He walked to the sign-in sheet, pen trembling in his hand. By the time he returned to his seat, 2 other people had spoken, both about the recycling bins. One worried about bears getting into the new compost containers. Another asked if the fee increase was really necessary. Then it was Harold's turn. He stepped up to the small wooden podium at the front of the room. The microphone squeaked as he adjusted it. For a moment, he just stood there, silent, staring at the council members like he was trying to decide if they were real. "I live on Maple Lane," he began, voice low. "With my mother. She's sick, very sick. She can't walk. Can't dress herself. I take care of her every day." He paused. Someone coughed. Rain tapped against the window. "I've asked 3 times for help with her medical trash. They said no. Every time. No reason, just no." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "I'm not asking for money. Not for special treatment, just don't make me drive 10 miles in a car I don't have to throw away bandages that smell like infection. Is that really too much?" The room was quiet now. Even the rain seemed to soften. Mayor Cho leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, I'm truly sorry you've had this trouble. Perhaps we can look into your case after the meeting." But Harold wasn't finished. "You say that," he said louder now. "You always say that. We'll look into it, but nothing changes. You sit up there in your nice chairs making rules for people you've never met, never helped, never lost sleep over." His hands gripped the edges of the podium. His knuckles turned white. "And tonight you're talking about recycling bins while my mother's dignity is rotting in a plastic bag on my porch." A gasp rose from the back. Mrs. Delgado stopped writing. Leo lowered his camera slightly. Mayor Cho opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, something shifted in the room. It was subtle at first, like a change in the air pressure. People sat up straighter. Shoulders tensed. Eyes narrowed. No one knew it yet. But the polite mask that held Havenbrook together, the quiet agreement to be reasonable, to wait your turn, to trust the system, had just begun to slip, and it wouldn't stop tonight. Harold Briggs stood at the podium, his chest rising and falling fast. His words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. No one moved. No one spoke. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft drumming of rain on the roof. Then Councilwoman Patel leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Briggs," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I understand you're upset, but we must follow procedure. Personal matters are handled through the town clerk's office, not during public comment on unrelated agenda items." Her words were polite. They were correct. But they landed like a door slamming shut. Harold's eyes flicked to her. "Unrelated?" he said, voice low but sharp. "My mother's health is unrelated?" Before Patel could answer, a woman stood up from the third row. It was Mrs. Delgado. Her red scarf was bright against her dark coat. Her hands were clenched. "Unrelated?" she echoed, her voice shaking. "You call rent hikes unrelated? My son lost his job last year. We're 2 months behind, and when I asked for help, they told me to apply online. Like that fixes anything." She wasn't shouting, but her voice carried through the room like a bell. People turned to look at her. Some nodded. Others looked down as if ashamed. Then another voice cut in. "They cut the bus route last spring," said Mr. Finch from the back. "Said it wasn't cost-effective. Now my doctor's appointments take 2 hours each way. I'm 91. I don't have 2 hours." A murmur spread through the room. Someone else stood. Then another. The neat rows of seated residents began to break apart like ice on a warming river. Mayor Cho raised her hands. "Please, everyone, one at a time." "We can't," but her voice was drowned out. A young man near the door yelled, "You ignored our petition about the school playground. It's been broken for a year." A woman beside him added, "And the potholes on Elm Street nearly wrecked my car." The room was no longer a council meeting. It was becoming something else, something raw and real. Years of small frustrations, quiet rejections, and polite no's were bubbling up all at once. Councilman Ruiz stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "Enough," he boomed. But instead of calming the room, his shout seemed to give others permission to speak louder. "We pay taxes," cried a man in a blue jacket. "But when we need help, you act like we're asking for a handout." Harold hadn't moved from the podium. He watched it all unfold, his anger now mixed with something like shock. He hadn't meant to start this. He just wanted someone to listen, but now everyone wanted to be heard. Mayor Cho tried again. "Friends, please, let's return to order. We can address these concerns." "How?" shouted Mrs. Delgado. "You've had our letters. You've had our calls. Nothing changes." Patel stood up, her face tight. "That's not fair. We've done our best with limited resources." "Your best?" Mr. Finch snapped. "Your best is cutting services while you give yourselves raises." That wasn't true. The council hadn't taken a raise in 3 years. But the words hit like truth anyway. Because it felt true. It felt like the system was built for those inside the room, not those outside it. Then a teenager near the front, Leo, the student journalist, lowered his phone and said quietly, "I've been filming this, and if you think this is just about bins and trash, you're wrong. This is about who gets heard." His voice was young but steady, and in that moment it cut through the noise. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was heavy. Tense. Everyone was breathing hard. Faces were flushed. Eyes were bright with tears or anger or both. Mayor Cho looked around, her calm finally cracking. We never meant to ignore anyone," she said softly. "We thought we were doing the right thing." "But you didn't ask us what the right thing was," said Harold, still at the podium. His voice was quieter now, but clear. "You decided for us." No one argued. No one defended. The truth of it settled over the room like a blanket. Then, from the back, a man stood slowly. He wore a worn work jacket and held a crumpled piece of paper. "I got evicted last month," he said. "Landlord said the town wouldn't renew his permit unless he raised rent. So he did. I sleep in my truck now, and I came here tonight hoping, I don't know, hoping someone would care." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He just stood there holding his paper like it was the last thing he owned, and that broke something in the room. A woman began to cry. Another man wiped his eyes. Councilwoman Patel sat down slowly, her hands in her lap. Even Ruiz looked away, jaw clenched. The polite rules of the meeting, the raised hands, the 3-minute limit, the careful language, had vanished. In their place was something messier, harder, but also more honest. People weren't speaking as citizens with complaints. They were speaking as humans with pain. Mayor Cho took a deep breath. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's forget the agenda for tonight." She turned off her microphone and stepped down from the dais. She walked to the center of the room where the floor was empty. "If you need to speak," she said, "just speak. No time limit. No rules, just tell us." And they did. One by one, people shared stories the council had never heard, about missed meals, broken promises, lonely nights, lost jobs, sick parents, children falling behind in school, fear of what tomorrow might bring. The rain outside grew heavier, but no one noticed. The room was too full of voices, real, unfiltered human voices. Up until this night, Havenbrook had prided itself on being a well-mannered town. Neighbors waved but didn't pry. Complaints were written in neat letters. Anger was swallowed, not spoken. Everyone played their part in the quiet dance of civility. But civility without care is just silence dressed up nicely. And on this rainy Tuesday night, that silence shattered. No one threw a punch. No one broke a window. But something far more powerful happened. The mask came off. The polite mode, the automatic "I'm fine," the "no trouble at all," the "you go first," switched off in real time, right before the council's eyes. And in its place stood something raw, real, and impossible to ignore. The meeting wasn't over. But the old way of doing things was. The room was no longer a council chamber. It had become something else, a place where years of quiet pain spilled out like water from a cracked dam. People weren't just speaking anymore. They were pouring out everything they'd held inside for too long. A retired teacher named Ms. Lang stood up, her hands shaking. She didn't say much at first, just stared at the floor. Then she whispered, "I taught here for 32 years. I loved every child who walked through my door. But now I can't afford my medicine. I skip doses to make it last." She looked up, eyes wet. "I never thought I'd be ashamed to ask for help." Her voice broke something in the room. A man near the front stood so fast his chair tipped over with a loud clatter. No one flinched. He just pointed at the dais and said, "You want us to recycle more, pay more, wait longer, but you never ask if we can even eat." Someone else shouted, "They closed the community center. Where are our kids supposed to go after school?" Another voice answered, "My daughter's teacher quit, said she couldn't live on her pay." The air grew thick with voices, all talking at once, not to argue, but to be seen, to be known. The neat order of the meeting was gone. Papers lay scattered. Coffee cups sat forgotten. Even the council members had stopped pretending to take notes. They just listened, really listened, for the first time. Then Leo, the high school student, raised his phone again. "I'm still live," he said quietly. "Thousands are watching." No one told him to stop. No one cared. Councilman Ruiz, who had always been the strictest about rules, suddenly stood up. His face was red not with anger but with something like shame. He slammed his gavel, not to call for order but in frustration. The sound cracked through the room like a branch snapping. "This isn't democracy," he yelled, his voice raw. "This is a pressure cooker and you've been turning up the heat for years while pretending not to hear it whistle." He looked at his fellow council members, then at the crowd. "I voted for every cut. Every efficiency. I thought I was being smart, but I was just being blind." He walked out then, not in anger, but in silence. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No one followed. No one even turned to watch him go, because the truth he spoke was already in the room, hanging heavy in the air. Mayor Cho stood alone at the center now. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her hair had come loose from its clip. She looked tired, yes, but also awake, as if she'd just opened her eyes after a long sleep. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time it didn't sound like a politician's line. It sounded like a person. "I'm so sorry we made you feel like your pain was a problem to manage, not a cry to answer." But her words didn't calm the room. If anything, they opened the floodgates wider. A woman near the back stood, holding a baby in her arms. "I work 2 jobs," she said, voice trembling. "I haven't slept through the night in months. And when I asked for childcare help, they told me I didn't qualify. What does that even mean? My child is real. My exhaustion is real." People began to clap. Not the polite applause of agreement, but the fierce, aching clap of recognition. "Yes, me too. I've been there." Then Harold, still at the podium, turned to face the crowd. "I didn't come here to start a riot," he said. "I came because I felt invisible. And I guess I wasn't the only one." He stepped down, walked slowly to his seat, sat. And for the first time all night he looked calm. But the energy in the room kept rising. It wasn't chaos, it was clarity. One man started listing every broken promise the town had made over the past 5 years. Another read aloud from a letter he'd written that was never answered. A teenager talked about how her friends were skipping meals so their families could pay rent. The live stream on Leo's phone showed comments pouring in. "This is happening in my town too. They act like we're lazy, but we're just tired." Finally, someone is saying it. Outside, the rain turned into a downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the lights flickered once, but no one noticed. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Delgado walked to the front, not to speak, but to hand Mayor Cho a folded piece of paper. "This is our petition," she said. "Signed by 3 on 12 residents. We asked for a meeting about housing help. You never replied." Cho took it with both hands like it was sacred. "I didn't see this," she said. "I swear I didn't." "Maybe not," Mrs. Delgado said gently. "But that's the problem. You weren't looking." The room fell quiet again, not because people ran out of words, but because they had said enough. The truth was out. The polite mask was off. And now everyone had to face what came next. Security stood by the door, arms crossed, but made no move to clear the room. Even they looked moved. One of them wiped his eye with the back of his hand. Mayor Cho looked around at the faces, angry, sad, tired, but no longer hidden. "We can't fix everything tonight," she said, "but we can start by listening. Really listening. And we can promise this, no more silence." No one cheered. No one clapped. But a kind of quiet understanding passed through the room. Something had broken, yes, but in the breaking, something new might grow. The meeting wasn't adjourned. It just ended. People stayed in their seats, talking softly to each other, sharing phone numbers, offering rides, asking, "Are you okay?" And in that moment, Havenbrook wasn't a town with a council. It was just a group of humans finally seeing each other clearly, without the filter of politeness, without the shield of procedure. The night wasn't over. But the old way of doing things was, and everyone in that room knew it. The meeting ended not with a gavel, but with silence. One by one, people stood, gathered their coats, and walked out into the rain. No one spoke much. There were no angry shouts, no final arguments. Just wet footsteps on the sidewalk and the soft hum of car engines starting in the parking lot. Inside the empty chamber, Mayor Eleanor Cho sat alone at the long table. Her hands rested on the stack of papers that had once held the night's agenda, now smudged with coffee rings and forgotten. The room smelled of damp wool and old wood. Rain tapped gently against the windows, as if the storm had softened after witnessing what happened inside. She didn't move for a long time. She just stared at the empty benches, replaying every voice, every face. Harold Briggs, Mrs. Delgado, the young mother with the baby, Leo and his phone. Councilman Ruiz walking out, not in rage but in shame. She felt heavy, not with guilt but with understanding. They hadn't been ignoring the people on purpose, but they had been ignoring them all the same. Outside, news vans pulled up, lights flashing red and white in the wet street. Reporters jumped out with microphones and cameras. They'd heard about the town hall meltdown. They wanted sound bites, drama, maybe a quote about mob rule. But when they asked residents leaving the building what happened, they got something different. "It wasn't a meltdown," said Mr. Finch, zipping his coat. "It was a wake-up call." "It was the first honest conversation we've had in years," added Mrs. Delgado, her red scarf now dark with rain. By morning, the story was everywhere. "Havenbrook erupts in town hall outburst," read one headline. But the video told a truer story, not of chaos but of pain finally being spoken aloud. People across the country watched Leo's live stream replay. Comments flooded in. "This is my town too. We've all been quiet for too long. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." At first, the mayor's office braced for backlash. Angry calls, resignation demands, lawsuits maybe. But instead, something strange happened. The phone rang, but not with complaints. People called to say thank you, to share their own stories, to ask, "What can we do now?" 3 days after the meeting, a small group gathered in the basement of St. Mark's Church. It wasn't official. No agenda, no minutes, just folding chairs, a pot of coffee, and a whiteboard someone had brought from home. Mrs. Delgado was there. So was Harold Briggs. Leo came with his notebook. Even Mr. Finch showed up, leaning on his cane. They didn't wait for the council. They started talking among themselves. About rent help, medical waste pickup, after-school programs. Someone suggested a ride-share list for seniors. Another proposed a community fridge. Ideas flowed, not from policy papers but from real need. Word spread. The next week, 20 people came. Then 40. They met in the school gym, then the library, then someone's backyard when the rain stopped. The council didn't run these meetings. They weren't even invited at first. But then one evening, Mayor Cho showed up, not in her blazer but in a sweater holding a tray of cookies she'd baked herself. She didn't speak at first. She just sat in the back and listened. When someone noticed her, there was a pause. But then Mrs. Delgado nodded and said, "You can stay. Just don't take notes for a report." "Take notes for us," Cho smiled faintly. "I'm here as Eleanor tonight, not the mayor." That small shift changed everything. Councilwoman Patel came the next week. She brought forms for hardship exemptions and helped people fill them out on the spot. Councilman Ruiz didn't speak much, but he carried chairs and made coffee. He never apologized out loud, but his actions said enough. The town wasn't fixed overnight. Rent was still high. Buses still didn't run to Maple Lane. But something deeper had changed. People looked each other in the eye now. They asked, "How are you?" and waited for the real answer. Neighbors checked on each other. A local mechanic offered free oil changes for single parents. A retired nurse started a weekly clinic in the church basement. The formal council meeting scheduled for the next month was canceled. In its place, the council announced Listening Tuesdays. No votes, no agendas, just open conversation in different neighborhoods. The first one was held in the park. Over 100 people came. Kids played on the grass while adults talked about streetlights, mental health, and how to support local farmers. Harold Briggs brought his mother in a wheelchair. She sat quietly in the sun, wrapped in a blanket while he spoke with the mayor about a new medical waste pickup pilot program. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. No one used the phrase polite mode out loud, but everyone knew what it meant now. They had seen how pretending everything was fine could slowly poison a community, and they had learned that real kindness isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's saying, "I can't do this alone," and trusting others to hear you. The national news moved on to other stories, but in Havenbrook life kept changing, slowly, steadily, together. And in the quiet moments when the rain fell again or the wind blew through the trees, people didn't just hear weather. They heard the sound of a town learning to breathe again, without masks, without scripts, just as they were. 6 months passed. Spring came to Havenbrook with soft green leaves and birdsong at dawn. The town looked much the same. Same brick sidewalks, same old clock tower, same harbor breeze, but something inside it had changed. Like a river that had shifted its course underground and now watered new ground. The recycling plan that sparked the meeting was finally approved, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't pushed through by the council. It was rebuilt by the people. At one of the listening Tuesdays, a group of neighbors suggested using old shipping containers as shared bins for streets with limited space. A high school class designed signs in 3 languages. Harold Briggs helped test a new pickup schedule for medical waste, and it worked. The fee increase was dropped. Instead, the town saved money by cutting waste in town offices first. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair, and it belonged to everyone. Harold no longer lived in silence. He still cared for his mother, but now a volunteer from the church drove him to the county facility twice a month. And on the other weeks, a small labeled bin sat by his curb, picked up quietly without shame. He also sat on the new Citizen Oversight Committee, a group of residents who reviewed town decisions before they went to vote. He wasn't loud in meetings, but when he spoke, people leaned in. They knew his words came from real life, not theory. Mayor Cho still wore her blazer sometimes, but she spent more time in community centers than in her office. She stopped giving speeches and started asking questions. What do you need? What's not working? How can we fix it together? Her approval ratings didn't matter anymore. What mattered was whether Mrs. Delgado's grandson had a safe place to do homework after school. He did, at the reopened community center. Or whether Mr. Finch could get to his doctor without missing lunch. He could, thanks to a new volunteer driver program. The town didn't become utopia. Rent was still high. Jobs were still scarce. But trust had returned, like a plant growing through cracked concrete. People believed again that their voices could move things, that change didn't have to come from the top down, but could rise from the ground up. News of Havenbrook spread quietly, not through viral outrage but through word of mouth. Other towns sent representatives to visit. They sat in on listening Tuesdays. They watched how decisions were made, not behind closed doors, but in school gyms with kids running underfoot and coffee in paper cups. A university professor wrote a paper about it. When politeness fails, humanity begins. It became required reading in civics classes across the state. But the real story wasn't in headlines or reports. It was in small moments. Like the day Leo, now a senior, showed his final journalism project, a short film called The Night We Spoke. It didn't show shouting or drama. It showed hands passing tissues, neighbors hugging, Councilman Ruiz helping an elderly woman to her car. The last frame was a quiet shot of the empty council chamber the morning after the meeting, sunlight streaming through the windows, a single coffee cup left on the table, or the moment when Harold's mother, Agnes, whispered to him one evening, "I feel seen again." She hadn't said much in years, but those words stayed with him. The council never forgot that night, not as a failure but as a turning point. They kept a photo on the wall of the town hall, not of a ribbon cutting or a parade, but of that rainy Tuesday. Blurred faces, raised hands, open mouths, real emotion. Under it, a simple plaque read, "We listen because we care." Children in Havenbrook schools now learned about community care alongside math and reading. They wrote letters not just to complain but to propose solutions. One class even designed a tiny free library that stood on the corner of Maple and 3rd, filled with books, seeds, and notes of encouragement. Of course, there were still hard days. Arguments flared. Mistakes were made. But now, when someone said, "This isn't working," the response wasn't silence or a form letter. It was, "Tell us more." The phrase polite mode became a quiet joke among locals. "Don't worry," someone might say with a smile. "My polite mode's off today." And that was okay. Because they had learned that true respect isn't about keeping quiet. It's about speaking honestly and listening deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Havenbrook didn't solve all its problems. No town ever does. But it had rediscovered something older and stronger than rules or procedures. The simple truth that people matter more than order, and connection matters more than control. On the 1-year anniversary of that meeting, the town held a gathering, not in the council chamber, but in the park. There were no speeches, just food, music, and open chairs. Mayor Cho sat on a blanket with Harold, Mrs. Delgado, and Leo. They didn't talk about policy. They talked about Agnes's new wheelchair, Leo's college plans, and whether the cherry trees would bloom early this year. As the sun set, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, no one mentioned the past night of shouting and tears. They didn't need to. It lived in how they treated each other now, in the way a stranger would hold a door, offer a ride, or simply ask, "You good?" and mean it. The council had witnessed humanity's polite mode switch off in real time. But what they saw after, the raw, messy, beautiful truth of people caring for each other, that never switched off again. And in that, Havenbrook found not just healing, but hope.